walked out of my own son's graduation party carrying an envelope that my daughter-in-law had just thrown across the kitchen table and called an insult. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I walked through the back door, across the lawn, and kept going until I reached the end of the block where an older gentleman was sitting on a bus bench with a paper bag at his feet. I sat down next to him. We didn't say anything for a while. Then I handed him the envelope. He looked at it, then looked at me. "You sure?" he asked. "It's not mine to keep," I said. He took it. I stood up and walked back to my car. By the time I got home, my phone had 12 missed calls. That was the beginning of the end, or maybe it was the end of something that had been dying for years. I'm 63 years old, and I have learned, slowly, the hard way, that silence is not the same as surrender. Sometimes silence is the only dignified response to people who have decided they already know everything about you. Let me tell you how we got there. My son. I'll call him my son because that's what he is. That's what he has always been to me. Graduated with his MBA from a state university in Ohio that May. First in our family to earn a graduate degree. I had worked 31 years at a manufacturing plant outside of Columbus, most of that time in quality control, and I had put away money every single month since he was born, not a college fund in the technical sense, just a savings account at our local credit union that I never touched, never talked about, and never stopped adding to. His mother and I divorced when he was 9. It wasn't ugly, not at first. We just ran out of road. She remarried within 2 years, a man I'll call her husband because that's all I need to say about him. And my son grew up in that house, in that neighborhood, in that life. I paid child support on time, every month, never missed a payment, never missed a birthday, never missed a little league game or a school play or a parent-teacher conference if they'd let me come. They didn't always let me come. Her husband had opinions about my presence. He shared them often, and loudly, and my ex-wife had a way of going quiet when he spoke that told me everything I needed to know about the dynamic in that house. I learned to pick my battles. I learned to show up anyway. I learned that my son watched everything, watched me stay steady, watched me keep showing up, watched me swallow things that would have broken a lesser man, and I trusted that someday that would matter. He got into the MBA program at 27, called me himself to tell me. I remember I was in the garage replacing the brake pads on my truck, and I sat down on the concrete floor with grease on my hands, and I couldn't speak for a moment. That's not something I'm embarrassed about. Some moments don't have words. He also called to tell me he was engaged. Her name isn't important for this story, but what is important is that from our very first meeting, she had decided something about me. I could see it in the way she looked at the house I'd lived in for 22 years. A modest house, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, updated, the other original to 1987. She looked at it the way some people look at things they've already classified and filed away. I was the blue-collar father, the one from the other side of the split. The one who wore boots to dinner and didn't know which fork to use at her parents' table in Dublin, Ohio, where the driveways were paved with something more expensive than asphalt. I tried. I want to be clear about that. I tried for 2 years before that graduation party. I bought her birthday gifts. I remember details she mentioned in passing, that she liked a particular kind of tea, that she'd been to Florence once and loved it. I asked about her job. I asked about her family. I was patient in ways I had no obligation to be patient. What I got in return was a particular kind of politeness, the kind that's just cold enough to let you know it's not real. My son saw it. He never said so directly, but I know my son. I've known him for 32 years. I can tell the difference between when he's comfortable and when he's managing 2 different rooms at the same time. The graduation party was held at her parents' house. Large place, screened-in porch, the kind of backyard that has a designated area for the grill and a separate designated area for sitting. Her mother had organized everything. Catered finger food, a banner across the fence, people I didn't know shaking my son's hand and calling him by a nickname I never heard before. I arrived with the envelope. Inside it was a card I had written by hand. I'm not a man of many words on paper, but what I wrote was honest, and a certified bank check for $22,000. Every dollar I had saved since he was born, compounded over the years into something I was proud of. My plan was to give it to him quietly, just the 2 of us, before the party got going. I wanted to say, this is 32 years of showing up. This is what I could do. I hope it helps you start. I didn't get that moment. Her mother pulled me into the kitchen almost immediately, said she wanted to make sure I knew the schedule for the afternoon. And while I was standing there, my daughter-in-law came in and saw the envelope on the counter where I'd set it down. She asked what it was. I told her it was a graduation gift from my son. She picked it up. I hadn't sealed it. I was going to write one more line in the card and seal it in the car, and she opened it before I could say anything. She looked at the check, and then she looked at me with an expression I will never forget as long as I live. "Is this supposed to be a joke?" she said. I said it wasn't a joke. $22,000, she said, in a voice she wasn't bothering to keep quiet. His bonus from work last quarter was more than this. Her mother turned toward the window. I said something like, "It's not about the amount. It's something I've been putting aside since he was born." She set the envelope back down on the counter and pushed it toward me with two fingers, the way you'd push something away that you didn't want touching you, and said, "You can keep it. It's embarrassing. He doesn't need this." Then she walked out of the kitchen. I stood there for a moment. Her mother didn't look at me. I picked up the envelope. I went to the backyard. I shook some hands. I got a plate of food I didn't eat. I watched my son laugh with people from his new life, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger exactly, something quieter. The feeling of a door closing. An hour into the party, I told my son I had to get going. He walked me to my car. He could tell something was wrong. I told you, I know my son, and he knows me, and he asked. I told him I wasn't feeling great, just tired, hot day. I hugged him. I told him I was proud of him. I meant both of those things completely. I drove to the end of the block. That's where I saw the gentleman on the bench. And that's where I gave him the envelope. His name was Stuart. I know that because he told me after he looked inside and said, "Mister, there is a check in here for $22,000. I told him I knew. He asked if I was all right. I said I wasn't sure. He said, "Neither am I most days." And I laughed, actually laughed, for the first time all afternoon. I didn't give it to Stuart out of spite. I want to be honest about that because it's important. I gave it to him because my daughter-in-law had been right about one thing. It wasn't the right gift for my son anymore. Not given how she'd receive it. Not given what it would cost him every time she looked at it and remembered that afternoon in her mother's kitchen. Some gifts become a burden the moment they're touched by someone else's contempt. I didn't want that for him. What I did want, what I had wanted for a long time without letting myself fully name it, was to stop pretending, to stop showing up to tables where I wasn't welcome and calling it family, to stop apologizing silently with every attempt and gesture and plate of food I didn't eat for being exactly who I am. I drove home. I sat on my porch. I thought about what I was going to do next. Here's what most people don't know about me. Because I've never been the kind of man who broadcasts his business, I had not been idle. Not for a long time. After the engagement, after the first year of dinners and events and holiday gatherings where I sat in the wrong chair and said the wrong things and wore the wrong shirt, I had started to make arrangements, not dramatic arrangements, quiet ones, practical ones. I consulted with an attorney, a woman I'd been referred to by a colleague at the plant, someone I trusted, about updating my estate documents. My will had been written 20 years ago, and it needed work. I updated my beneficiaries on my 401k and my life insurance policy. I established a trust, a simple one, that specified how my assets were to be distributed and under what conditions. I created what my attorney called a letter of instruction, not legally binding, but personal, a document that explained my reasoning in my own words to anyone who needed to understand it. I also opened a new account. Not $22,000 that was gone now in Stuart's hands, and I hope to God he used it well, but a different account, one tied to a small piece of property I'd inherited from my own father, a double wide on 2 acres in rural Kentucky that I'd been renting out for 18 years and that had appreciated in value in ways that would have surprised my daughter-in-law considerably. I didn't tell anyone about any of this, not my son, not my ex-wife, not my sister in Cincinnati who I talked to every Sunday. I just did it quietly the way I had done everything for 32 years. put my head down and worked and let the results speak when the time came. The call started that evening. My ex-wife first. Her voice tight in a way I hadn't heard since the divorce proceedings. She said she'd heard I'd caused a scene at the party. I asked what scene. She said I'd embarrassed her son. I said her son was also my son, and that I'd left early because I wasn't feeling well, and that if someone in that kitchen had told a different story, I'd be interested to know the details. She hung up. Her husband called 20 minutes later. He'd never called me directly in 15 years. He said I needed to understand what kind of family my son had married into now, and that I should think carefully about how I chose to engage going forward. I said I'd been thinking carefully about exactly that for quite some time. He didn't have a response to that, which didn't surprise me. My daughter-in-law texted. 3 messages. The first said that I had made her mother uncomfortable. The second said that my behavior had put my son in a difficult position. The third said she hoped I understood that people in her family handled things differently. I read all 3. I didn't respond to any of them. My son called the next morning, early before I'd had my coffee. He asked if I was okay. I said yes. He asked what happened with the gift. I told him the truth. Not all of it, not the full picture, but the relevant part. I told him his wife had seen the check, made her feelings known, and that I'd decided to give it away. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, you didn't have to do that." "I know," I said. "I would have wanted it. I know that too." "She didn't mean, son," I said, and I said it gently because I meant it gently. "You don't have to explain her to me. I'm not angry. I'm fine. I just need you to know that I see things clearly and I'm going to start acting like it." He asked what that meant. I told him it didn't mean anything dramatic. It just meant I was done apologizing for my life to people who had already decided what my life was worth. He was quiet again. Then he said he loved me. I said I loved him too, and I meant that without reservation. That was April. In June, I retired from the plant. 31 years, they gave me a dinner and a plaque and a handshake from a regional manager I'd never met. I don't say that bitterly. It was a good career, and I'm proud of it. But I had plans for what came next. I sold the property in Kentucky. The market was favorable, and my realtor, a young man who'd grown up 2 counties over from where that land sat, told me I'd be foolish to wait. The sale closed in August. The number after taxes and fees and the commission was not the kind of number I had ever associated with myself. My attorney helped me structure the distribution. The trust I had established was funded. Accounts were updated. Everything was in order. I want to be precise about what happened next, because I've heard it told wrong. I did not cut my son out of anything. I want that to be completely clear. My son is in my will. My son is in my will. My son is a beneficiary. My son is, and will always be, my son. Nothing that happened at that graduation party changed that. What changed was everything else. What changed was the understanding that I had spent 32 years building something, and that I had never, not once, stood up in a room and said, "This is what it is. This is what I've done. This is what it means." So in September, I called my son and asked if he'd come over for dinner. Just him. I didn't say that part, but I think he understood. He came on a Thursday. I made the brisket that his grandmother used to make, a recipe I'd learned from her before she passed. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with his homework for 9 years before the divorce, and I told him some things. I told him about the account I'd been adding to since he was born. I told him what the check would have said. I told him about the property in Kentucky and the sale and the trust. I showed him the letter of instruction my attorney had helped me draft. I watched his face as he read it. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me any of this?" I said, "Because it wasn't about telling. It was about doing." He looked at the letter again. He looked at the number associated with the trust. He put it down on the table carefully, the way you put down something you realize is heavier than you thought. "She didn't know," he said. "No," I said. "She thought." "I know what she thought," I said. "I let her think it. That was my choice." He asked me what I wanted him to do with this information. I told him I didn't want him to do anything with it. I told him I wasn't showing him to make a point, or to start a fight, or to ask him to choose sides. I showed him because he's my son and he deserved to know who his father is, not the version assembled from other people's impressions, the real version. He cried a little. I'm not going to make that smaller than it was. He sat at my kitchen table and he cried, and I handed him a paper towel because I don't keep tissues in the house, and we both laughed at that, and then we sat there for a while, not saying much, which is something we've always been able to do together. He told me he was sorry. I told him he had nothing to be sorry for. He said he should have paid more attention. I said he was busy building a life, and that's what I raised him to do. He said he was going to talk to his wife. I said that was between the two of them, and I meant it. I don't know what that conversation looked like. He hasn't told me the details, and I haven't asked. What I know is that something shifted after that. The invitations to dinners became more genuine. The phone calls became more frequent. His wife is not warm with me. I don't expect that, and I don't need it. But something changed in the way she looks at me, like she's recalibrating, like she took a measurement a long time ago and is only now realizing the instrument was off. Stuart, the man from the bus bench. I did think about him. I still do sometimes. I went back to that corner a few weeks after the party, not with any particular plan, just to see. He wasn't there. I hope the check helped him. I hope he cashed it without any trouble. I hope wherever he is, he's doing all right. He laughed with me on the worst afternoon I'd had in years, and that matters more than he'll ever know. I turned 64 this past winter. My son and his wife came to the house. She brought a pie, made it herself, apparently, which my son told me twice as if he needed me to register the significance. I thanked her for it. I meant it. The pie was good. We sat at the kitchen table, all three of us, and there wasn't anything dramatic about it. No confrontations, no speeches, just people eating pie in a kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, in the middle of February, with the heat running and the windows fogged. I've been thinking lately about what I would say to a younger version of myself, the man at 30 who was signing divorce papers and packing boxes and wondering what kind of father he was going to be able to be from the outside of a house. What would I tell him? I'd tell him to keep doing the work. I'd tell him it takes longer than you think for the truth to find its way into the right rooms. I'd tell him that dignity isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just stays in the same place, doing the same things year after year, until one day someone looks up and finally sees it standing there. I tell him that $22,000 handed to a stranger on a bus bench is not a loss. Sometimes it's the most honest thing you've ever done with money. And I'd tell him that brisket made from his grandmother's recipe at a kitchen table with his son, that is the whole thing. That's all of it. That's what 32 years of showing up was for. There's a version of that afternoon I used to replay, standing in that kitchen, holding an envelope that represented 32 years of my life, watching it get pushed away like something unclean. For a long time I wondered if I had handled it wrong, if I should have said more, if silence was weakness dressed up as dignity. I don't wonder that anymore. What I know now is that the way a thing ends is almost always the direct result of the choices made long before the ending. My daughter-in-law didn't make a snap judgment in that kitchen. She had been making it for 2 years, in small moments, in the way she held her shoulders when I walked into a room. And I had been making my own choices too. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. Every month I added to that savings account was a choice. Every document I signed with my attorney was a choice. Every time I showed up to something where I wasn't fully welcome and behaved with decency anyway, that was a choice. Consequences don't arrive out of nowhere. They accumulate. What I didn't understand for most of my life is that character isn't what you perform when people are watching. It's what you do in the years when nobody's paying attention. I worked for 31 years in a plant where the work was physical and unglamorous and honest. I raised a son from the outside of a house, which is harder than people who haven't done it will ever know. I kept my word. Not because I expected a reward for it, but because a man who doesn't keep his word eventually becomes a man he doesn't recognize in the mirror. That matters. How you conduct yourself when there's nothing to gain from it. That's the whole thing. That's the only real measure I know. And then there's the question of clarity, of knowing what you're looking at. I spent years interpreting kindness where there wasn't any, inventing goodwill that didn't exist, telling myself that if I was patient enough, the room would warm up. That wasn't patience, that was a failure to see clearly. The clearest thing I ever did was stand in that kitchen, understand exactly what was happening, and make a decision from a place of knowledge rather than hope. Stewart got $22,000 that afternoon. I got something harder to quantify. The feeling of acting in complete alignment with what I actually believed, instead of what I wished were true. The third thing is the long game, not stubbornness, not refusal to change. I mean the specific endurance required to keep doing the right thing when it isn't paying off yet, when the room is cold, when you're sitting at the wrong table and eating food you don't taste. My son is in my life. He came to my birthday. His wife brought a pie she made herself. None of that happened because I forced it or demanded it or made ultimatums. It happened because I stayed steady for long enough that the truth eventually had nowhere left to hide. I gave away a check that afternoon. I don't regret it. Some things are only worth keeping if they're received the right way, and some things you carry for 32 years turn out not to be about money at all.